It's interesting. I have never found, well, I'll put it like this. I'll set this up like this. There's this point where you press record, right? And there's a point before you press that record button, right? And then there's this kind of moment where you press record. So you go from not recording to recording. And I've yet to find the right moment to press record. At some point, I just say fuck it. Let's just record. Like I never quite feel prepared. I don't know if I'm prepared, but so there's this whole neurotic thing that goes on to press that record button. So I just noticed that. And so I am sharing it with you, and I am coming from a beautiful morning here in California. It's starting to feel like the winter is breaking open into spring, just the hints of it. And I think I ran about 4 miles this morning. And I'm also in day 3 of a kind of no carb diet, which I which I've been doing on and off for like a year. And I notice it helps most of the time it helps my cognition and my mood and my energy level. Yet the problem with this diet though is that at some point it starts to really mess with your sleep. And then there's this whole kind of tug of war about like, well, is the loss of sleep worth the benefits, and it starts to counteract. So then at some point I'm like, no, I'll add a potato. And of course, like within 2 days, the potato ends up in like eating bonbons and popcorn and, fruity pebbles and up at night, binging on sugar. So anyways, um, that seems to be the cycle. So maybe this time what I'll do is I'll just start I'll just start eating one potato at night, like in the next couple of days. And let's just see if I can do like carbohydrate free through the day and then eat one potato at night so that I can sleep well. Anyways, I thought that was quite pertinent to A.H. Almaas here. So one of the things I have been, I mean, one of the people in my head is Meister Eckhart and and Heidegger's appropriation of Eckhart and this sense of letting be, or Gelassenheit, as it's said in German, the sense of letting being be, which I think you could also say is, in some sense, letting being disclose itself. And that there is something particular about being a human being, right? And it's in our relationship to being as such that it seems like for the being itself, you could say, to disclose itself, that the human being is something like the condition for that possibility. I'm not saying that it's like being is dependent or something on the human being, or without the human being that there's no being. I don't think that that's true. But there's some for being's disclosure, right? In some sense, articulates itself through us in some mysterious way. And I see Almaas in this line, right? This kind of quality of letting, right? Letting experience be what it is, right? Following it, staying true to it, attuning to it, letting it unfold, which is the opposite of the whole technological Western thing, which is we don't know that there is such a thing as being, let alone its disclosure, right? Therefore, we're obsessed with beings and then seek to make plans and control it and possess being in some way in our calculations, and then store it in reserve and kind of like free like put an IV in the standing reserve, right? And so to optimize ourselves for further consumption and control. And in some sense, this is right. To be in this time is to reckon with that, right? Is to be in this time is to find oneself of this time, right? And so to find one's sovereignty in the midst of this technological technicity, right? This domination of technicity and the forgetfulness of being in Heidegger's language, right? It's from this 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 sense of becoming sovereign in the midst of this time that I'm reading Almaas, right? That someone like Almaas, I think, comes forward from that sense as a way of comporting oneself in this time without being dominated by it. So those are some of my thoughts that I've been having between the last reading and this reading regarding Almaas, and putting him in a greater context. So let's start reading. Okay, looks like we're gonna jump into another case study here of Almaas. So Almaas goes on. Oops. Another student, Anna, had a very long struggle with issues of independence. Every time there was a movement towards autonomy, which manifested as a success in her life, such as a better job or a good opportunity, she would become physically ill. Finally, she was able to recognize her personal essence as her true being and identity. However, she reacted with the usual negative, separation-seeking feelings and behavior. She missed several group sessions. However, because she worked on the issue hard and long and was truly desperate about needing her autonomy, she managed to work out some of the issues herself and return to complete her work. Here is a report of a part of her process. So I think completing, I wonder what Almaas means by completing the work in this sense, and with the issue of autonomy, would be something like your sense of person derives from the personal essence, the personal quality of being itself, right? Is where you find the source of your own personhood in the world, versus your object's relations, right? Versus circumstantial, images and a sense of self via some external dependence. That you're completing the work on the personal essence would be in some sense becoming identified with what Almaas would call the pearl, right? The personal essence. He goes on. So Anna, I think this is quoting Anna. The last session I had with you, I was feeling as if I wanted to quit the group. I felt there was no place that I fit in. And whenever I was asked to do anything at all, I felt as if I did not want to do it. I felt that if I did do it, it was losing a part of myself. While talking to you about this, I realized that it was all connected to my feelings of independence, and that I needed to cling to my newfound independence, and that anything that I did that others asked me to do made me feel it as an impingement on my freedom. Right. So this kind of, you can hear, I think you can hear in this the sense in which Anna's independence was something in some way occurred as fragile to her. Therefore, right, her involvement in this case in the group, in relation, right, was a threat to that independence. So she clings to it, right, and then sets up the world as the opposition, right, to her independence. So this is, I think, what I'm hearing her being expressed here. But let's see. The growth that I have made in gaining that freedom and independence has seemed a long and hard struggle for me. I do not want to lose this feeling of power and independence. You help me see how this part of me cannot be lost because it is part of what I am, my essence. So there's the insight, right? If I become identified with this personal essence, right, as a quality of being, then, right, no person or situation can take it away from me because it's essential. It's not derivative or conditional, right? It's intrinsic to my very existing and the source of it in some sense. She goes on, I feel very powerful and strong, except when I get close to someone giving me love. And then I become frightened. My fear of the group and the feelings I have of not belonging are also tied to feelings of losing a part of myself if I give in, if I stop fighting. I feel as if I have to fight in order to preserve what I am. And I feel the fight as a loss of something that I want even more than myself sometimes. For the first time in my life, I can remember I am functioning out of what I really am, from the place where I truly come from. Almaas says, there are a few points that we want to single out from this account. One, there are other reasons behind the desire to terminate besides acting out resistance. We see in Anna's case that independence brings about a conflict of feelings she doesn't fit in, and also the fear that she will give up independence for the sake of a love object. This conflict between having one's independence and having the love object or its love is a very common one, connected with issues of the rapprochement crisis, which we will discuss in detail in later chapters. 2. The definiteness and the certainty of the state of autonomy accompanying the experience of the personal essence. 3. The value, the preciousness of the personal essence and its attendant feelings of autonomy. People go to great lengths doing what they think will preserve this autonomy of being. The value of the personal essence is experienced both in the ways it feels and in what it applies for one's life. The fullness, completeness, strength feel very pleasurable, even smooth and sensuous. There is a burst of joy when we realize this personal sense of being and when we see the implications of this freedom and autonomy for our lives. You know, in some sense, as he's describing the experience of the personal essence coming online, I keep picturing my son, right? Teague, who's going on 18 months. And he's in, I think, what they call the practicing phase, right? Where you have to really watch him because he's got this kind of, he's got this sense of grandeur, like he could just walk off a cliff, right? And it's kind of like almost like a grandiose, verboseness about him, right? And he sings and he's, learning the alphabet and he's kind of going on, but to look at him, right? It's my wife and I often just, sit and just watch him. And there's something that shines forth from him that is something like beauty itself, but it's got this quality of personal preciousness, right? That is just intoxicating to be around. Um, and I've been feeling into it, like, because there's that whole sense of like, well, you can always say, it's you're biased because you're evolutionarily kind of predisposed and have this oxytocin that kind of comes over you as parents, so you don't kill the kid when it screams. I, I mean, I can kind of get this, but like when really sitting with it and meditating on the experience as we're having it, it's more like there's a luminosity that is a kind of personalness that's coming online, that's coming through his features, his faces, but you can't reduce to any of those features. You can't reduce it to any of these behaviors. There's no thing that you can reduce it to, but it's a felt presence. Now, it's not like he has any sense of it. It's not like he doesn't have images and self images. In fact, we're doing the Turing test about like whether or not he can even recognize his own image. What you do is you put a stamp on his nose and you put him in front of the mirror. And if he takes the stamp off, right, that he's associating that picture with himself. And you put the stamp on and he doesn't do it. I don't know what he thinks he's looking at when he looks at himself, which is a fascinating idea. So there's no sense of an image that is being represented from him that's gleaming out, right? And so I don't even know how an image could gleam out of someone, but there's something kind of coming through. And I wonder if this is the very beginnings, in a very pure way, the beginnings of something like the personal essence, right? This kind of verbose, joyous spontaneity coming out of him. Anyways, ironically, however, when we realize the personal essence, that is, when it is a permanent attainment rather than simply an experience, we no longer feel the desire for that coveted autonomy. It simply ceases to be an issue and falls away, leaving us with no need or desire for autonomy, nor any conflicts around autonomy. So in some sense, when the personal essence stops becoming a state that we have or an experience that we have, but becomes what we are, the concern for autonomy, right, in the foreground completely goes away, I think is what he's saying, because there's something so implicit that it requires no thought or reflection on our part, right? And because it's unconditionally felt as our essence and the very fact of our being, it's in the very ground of ourselves in some sense, we don't need to be concerned about it. So paradoxically, when we're really autonomous, we're not thinking about being autonomous, in other words, nor shoring it up, nor needing it. Almost goes on, we are, and in our being, we are absolutely autonomous. We are ourselves, our own person. Our qualities are completely our own. Our capacities are simply part of us. We're able to act freely and autonomously, appropriate to the situation. Without feeling or thinking, we are autonomous. Our autonomy is now second nature and is not qualified by our situation. We might be practically restricted from doing what we want, but nothing can stop us from being who we are. We might be literally in prison, but as our personal essence, we are free and autonomous. We need do nothing to be autonomous. Our sense of being is our autonomy. Thus, when our actions or expressions are controlled by external circumstances, we experience no loss of autonomy, no loss of self-esteem. The restrictions are felt as just external and superficial restrictions. Our bodies, even our minds, can be restricted, but who we are cannot be touched. We seek autonomy, have all kinds of issues and conflicts about autonomy, only when our autonomy is not completely established, and ego autonomy is never complete autonomy. Only the realization of being can bring complete, absolute autonomy. So, in other words, right, you can kind of ask yourself in your life, are you in conflicts, right, about being who you are with somebody? Does the way someone treats you, or some dynamic at work, or some kind of a situation in relationship, feel like you have to fight to be who you are, that you require being heard or seen in some way, and if you aren't, you start to feel threatened and act out in predictable ways? If those things are true, they may indicate on some level a loss of contact and in touchness with the basis of who you truly are.